to Introduction to Genetic Algorithms. So from now on, we will not be working on machine learning, but we will be working on artificial intelligence. It's going to be the first lecture for the artificial intelligence. We will be starting with genetic algorithms. As usual, we will be starting with the summary of the last week. Last week was a crowded week. We have seen bootstrapping, we have seen ensemble learning, and we have seen some types of ensemble learning. Let's try to remember. So bootstrapping was an important technique. Basically, that's the technique we use in elections, for example, where you want to predict the result, but you don't have so many samples. You cannot ask everybody for which party they are going to vote for. You just select the sample, and then from that sample statistics, or from this initial sample set, you create some bootstraps. And then from these bootstraps, you make the statistics again. And then this calculation gives you a much more confident statistics. Because if, for example, you would like to calculate the mean value here, remember from last week's example, that was a drug test. We had 8 people and we asked them whether they feel better or worse when they take the drug, and 3 of them said they feel worse, but 5 of them said they feel better. And if we get the mean, that's pretty close to 0. It's 0.5. It's pretty close to 0. That means the drug doesn't have any effect. But you cannot be sure because we have 8 people. That's not too much. And you cannot do more experiments because it's kind of expensive to make this experiment. So what we can do is we can use bootstrapping in order to make a more confident statistics. What we did was we took bootstraps from this initial sample set, and then from these bootstraps we calculated the mean again. And when we put these means into a histogram, what we have seen is the distribution of the means are pretty close to 0. And it's not just one mean, but it's a lot of means, which made us sure the statistics we made was correct. Okay, that was the idea behind bootstrapping. We had another example. We would like to calculate the height of every person on the planet, and since it's not possible to ask everybody their height, we were taking a sample set. From the sample set we were creating bootstraps, and from these bootstraps we were trying to calculate or predict the height of every person on the planet. Okay, that was the idea behind bootstrapping. And then we have seen something called ensemble learning. And the motivation to the ensemble learning was combining multiple models together can often produce a much more powerful model. Okay. For example, here we have 3 algorithms. We have a decision tree, we have support vector machine, and we have logistic regression, and they are both voting. Somehow they are both voting. And assume that the decision tree said this image is a hot dog image. Okay. And let's say support vector machine said this is a hot dog image as well. And logistic regression said this is not a hot dog image. Since 2 of them said this is a hot dog image and 1 said that's basically not a hot dog image, by using majority voting we can say that this is a hot dog image. So the idea is, if you combine a lot of weak learners, so these are weak learners because their prediction accuracy is not super great, right? But if you combine many of them together, and if you combine somehow their decisions, then we can have a better predictor. Okay, so the basic idea is combining weak learners. And we have seen basically there are 3 methods. One is bagging, one is boosting, and the other is stacking. Okay, and these 2 are homogeneous ensemble learning techniques, and this is a heterogeneous technique, which means you can stack the same kind of weak learner in these 2 algorithms, but in stacking you can basically, as we did here, you can basically use different kinds of weak learners. And the idea behind bootstrap aggregation thing is namely bagging. is to produce semi-independent models from the data. So why it is semi-independent? Because we basically train and different models and independent models. We have a data set, we create bootstraps from this data set, and even if we use the same model type, for example, we use decision tree here. Even if we use the same decision tree type, since we are training these guys with different data, at the end they become different models. Okay? And by using these different models, once we make a prediction and combine their predictions, we have a better predictor, or we have a more robust predictor. Okay, that was the idea behind pegging. And the important thing with pegging was it's working in parallel. So you can train all these models in parallel. They're not depending on each other. Okay, we are bootstrapping the data. We are creating a lot of bootstraps for each model, and then we create each model independently. No feedback coming or going from any of the models. Okay, and then we saw a concept called random forest that's basically using decision trees together with pegging technique. Okay, and the idea to use random forests or pegging is once we use decision trees, they have a tendency to overfit. That's something we have seen in the decision tree lecture. If you use random forests or pegging, then you compensate for that. Okay, the overfitting is taken care of. But it's comparatively slower to decision trees because you are using basically more than one decision tree. But in the end, you don't overfit if you use random forests. And now we have seen another technique called boosting. And the basic difference between pegging and boosting is summarized in this image. In pegging, we train our models in parallel. They make their decisions independently, and then we combine their decisions. Okay, that was the idea behind pegging. In boosting, things change. You start with a model, you start with an initial data, you make a prediction, and then you try to compensate for your errors. Okay. The next model was using the prediction error of the previous model. Therefore, that's not a parallel working strategy, that's a sequential working strategy. That's the basic difference between pegging and boosting. And that's another example. This is pegging working in parallel, creating T different models, and that's boosting working sequentially. That's getting the data, initial data, and then training a model by using the errors that's done with the initial model. It's boosting the data, and then it's using the second model and it's boosting the data again and again. So the idea behind boosting was, let's say this is our first iteration, we split the space into two. Here we made an error. Okay, these are positive samples, but they are classified as negative samples. So we made them more important. And in the second iteration, our classifier is trying to classify these boosted samples correctly. Okay, therefore this is our second iteration weak learner. But with this weak learner, these guys are correctly classified, these guys are correctly classified, now these guys are incorrectly classified. Now in this iteration, we boost them, and our third weak learner is trying to correctly classify these guys. Once we combine all these three iterations, we come up with basically a more robust learner or predictor. Okay. And we have seen two techniques. Basically, the first one was ADA boost, the other one was gradient boost. With the ADA boost, what we were doing is it's the same strategy, boosting strategy. Basically, we get the initial data, we train a model, and then once we do the predictions, we boost the incorrectly classified samples, and then With these boosted training sets, we train our second model, and that goes on like this. Okay, that was the idea behind auto boosting. And the difference between gradient boosting and auto boosting was, since in auto boosting we were basically uh, boosting the data that was misclassified, right? But here we just use the residuals of the data. We are not boosting any data. We are just using the residuals or misclassified residuals, and then we are using the boosting strategy with the gradient boosting. Okay, that was the difference between auto boosting and gradient boosting. And let's try to revisit our previous quiz. The method we can use to resample data with sampling with replacement, that is bootstrapping. Bagging trains its classifiers in parallel. That was the idea behind bagging. Ensemble learning can overcome overfitting problem. That's true. For example, with decision trees, we can overcome the overfitting problem. Mean shift algorithm moves the cluster center to denser areas. Yes, that was the idea behind mean shift algorithm. Auto boosting trains its classifier in parallel. That's wrong. Neither auto boosting nor gradient boosting. No boosting algorithm trains its classifiers in parallel. They work in a sequential manner. Auto boosting decreases the weights of wrongly classified samples. That's very wrong. That's the opposite. It's increasing the weights of the wrongly classified samples. That was the boosting. Okay. Which of the following is true for gradient boosting? It tries adjusting weights of the data points, focus on difference between the predictions and the ground truth. The second one is the correct answer. Mean shift algorithm requires the initial number of clusters. That's false. That was the idea behind mean shift. That was just requiring the radius of the search area. A tree stump is a weak learner with two levels. That's true. Combining multiple models together can often produce a much more powerful model. That's basically the definition of ensemble learning. Okay, that was basically the summary of the last week. Now let's start with the content of this week. This week we will be working on genetic algorithms. First, we will see what genetic algorithms are, why we need them, and then we will work on some terminology, and then we will see two examples. The first one is Knapsack problem, the second one is traveling salesman problems, and then we will be working on some limitations and applications of genetic algorithms. Okay, so genetic algorithms relies on survival of the fittest, but survival of the fittest usually misunderstood by people. People usually think that the strongest of the species survives. That's quite wrong. That's not what Charles Darwin said. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Okay, that's basically the idea behind genetic algorithms. You are not behind the strongest species, or you are not behind the most intelligent species, but we are behind the species that's most responsive to change. Okay. So why do we need genetic algorithms? We usually use genetic algorithms for problems that takes too much time if we try to solve them in a brute force manner. So we will be working on traveling salesman problem. If you are from computer science background, you should know that takes quite some time if you want to solve this problem in a brute force manner. And we will be working on 01 knapsack problem as well. We will be working in detail for that problem. But let me try to make a brief introduction to the knapsack problem. So let's say we will go on hiking, okay? And then there are some items that we can carry in our bag. And all these items have weight, as you see in this column, and they have survival points. Okay? and your bag can carry, for example, 30 kilograms. You cannot carry more than 30 kilograms. And each item have a survival point. And if the survival point is higher, that means it might be more useful to you. Okay. And the knapsack problem is an optimization problem to understand which items are best to take with you. Okay. For example, this item have a high survival point. Okay, it's 15, but its weight is 15 as well. So if you take this sleeping bag, you can carry only 15 kilograms more because it's occupying half of your allowed weight, which is 30 kilograms. Okay, but if you take a rope with you, it's 3 kilograms and its survival point is 7. But here we have a pocket knife, okay, which is pretty light. It's 2 kilograms, but it has a pretty high survival point. And for example, logically, if you would like to survive, and if you can just carry 30 kilograms, it's a much better idea to get a pocket knife with you than take, for example, glucose with you. Okay, that's the knapsack problem. That's an optimization problem. And you will be given a maximum weight that you can carry, okay, which is 30 kilograms in this case. And then you will be given items with their weights and survival points. And you would like to optimize the content of your bag. So the best thing is you will be carrying 30 kilograms in the end. It's not 29 kilograms or 25 kilograms. You will be carrying 30 kilograms at most, and you will be having the highest survival point. So that's the optimization problem we would like to solve. Okay. For example, if you take rope and pocket knife, you will have 5 kilograms in your bag. Okay, but you will have 17 survival points, which is quite high. And if you have 5 kilograms occupied by these two items, you will have 25 kilograms more to carry. Okay, which means you can basically take glucose with you, and that's all. But you can take, for example, a sleeping bag as well as a torch. See, and if you take, for example, a sleeping bag, which is 15 survival points, and a torch, which is 5, that makes 20. And it's a good idea to take these two items because their survival point is 20. And if you just take glucose, its survival point is 17. So that's the optimization problem we will be trying to solve. And if you increase the number of items, actually, and if you try to solve this problem in a brute force manner, the time it requires increases exponentially, and it basically becomes unsolvable in a brute force manner. So genetic algorithms basically comes into hand when you have problems such as this one, some optimization problem. Okay, so in computer science, a genetic algorithm is a meta-heuristic inspired by the process of natural selection. Okay, that's why I showed you Charles Darwin image in the first slide. It belongs to the larger class of evolutionary algorithms. So it's different. Evolutionary algorithms are more generic algorithms. Genetic algorithms is a subclass of evolutionary algorithms. Genetic algorithms are commonly used for optimization and search problems. That's an important thing as well. It relies on biologically inspired operators such as mutation, crossover, and selection. We will be seeing in detail all of these operators and how they work. So, what does it mean to adapt, basically? Now, we have two birds here, two blue birds, and they are living in a forest where most of the bush is in red color. Okay, so it's basically difficult or unlikely for these blue birds to survive from predators because the bush is red, the bird is blue, and the predator can basically see these blue birds. Therefore, red birds have better chance for survival. Okay, that's what evolution says basically. As generation pass, birds that carry red genes have higher survival chance. Okay, that's the adaptation part of the genetic algorithms. So creatures are described by their DNA. Basically, creatures have a set of DNA in their cells which encode what they are. This genetic code describes traits such as height, gender, hair color, number of fingers, how they look, etc. When an organism such as our cells is created, our cells grow and develop following the blueprint embedded in our DNA. Okay, that's basically what DNA is. We will be using the concept of DNA for creating our population, for creating an individual of our population. Okay, that's why DNA is important. Survival of the fittest. Once a critter is born, it needs to survive. Naturally, all critters must find for resource, shelter, and the ones which are more suited for their environment have a better chance of being the ones on top. Okay. Being the fittest means you have more children. Basically, you can reproduce. If you are fittest or if you are fit enough, you can produce. And those critters who excel are able to have more children than those who are weaker. And the fit DNA lives on and is duplicated, whereas the weak DNA slowly dies off. That's an idea we will be using in our genetic algorithms. So we will be choosing the best creatures in the population to carry to the next generation. Okay, we will not be carrying the weak ones to the next generation. We will always be choosing the fit ones. So changes happen in reproduction. It needs to happen in reproduction. If DNA never changed, then the fit would soon be the only ones left, and the population would be comprised of clones. That's not something we want. Okay, neither in nature nor in genetic algorithms. We would like to have the fit to survive. Yes, that's something. But we want change as well. So we want some weak creatures to survive as well. If a population of blue and red birds required hiding in blue bushes, blue would be better and the red would all die. Okay, that's what would happen. However, if suddenly red bushes were to place to be, there would be no red birds to take advantage of it, and all the blue birds would die soon. And in order to avoid that, that's the nature's way. Even if all the red birds die, you carry their genes in the blue birds. Okay, you need to carry the weak genes in the population as well. You can never know when the genes will be used. Okay, for example, in the forest there were all blue bushes, suddenly red bushes took control of the forest, and if the birds doesn't have any genes, if all the birds with red genes died, none of them survived, then soon all the blue birds would perish as well. In order to avoid that, we need to have some weak genes transferred to the next generations as well. That's how it works with the people as well. If, for example, the father have blue eyes, the mother have black eyes, the blue gene is weaker, but it's transferred to next generations. And even after, for example, 5-6 generations, a blue eye can occur as well. So that's still in the chance. Okay. And we have the concept of mutations. And mutations are entirely random. They're not a conscious decision to make the critter better. So people somehow have a misunderstanding about the mutations. Mutations are not good. Mutations are not bad. Mutations are random. Okay, that's the thing with human genetics as well. That's the thing with the genetics algorithms as well. Mutations are just random. And species change. That's a fact. A population of all 100 bluebirds is extremely unlikely. If that happens, we have seen what could happen. And odds are some of them will be slightly off color, giving them a better chance of hiding in a red bush. Because you can never know whether a red bush will occupy the forest. If something happens like this, if red bushes occupy the forest, then the birds are supposed to survive that. Okay, and these will survive, and the odds are that some of the offsprings will have an even closer color to red, and slowly the population color will shift because the bluebirds will be the ones that die because of the predators. Okay, and let's see another example about the genetic algorithms. And assume you're head of a country, and in order to keep your city safe, you implement a policy like this. You select all the good people and ask them to extend their generation by having their children. And only the good people will have children, okay? And this repeats for a few generations, and you will notice that now you have an entire population of good people. So we change the input, we change the population such that we get better output. In this case, that's a better country. So that's how genetic algorithms work. You have an idea, you have something to reach. For example, you would like to reach to a better country, and to reach that goal, you change your population, and that's how genetic algorithms also work. Okay, so these are basically the steps of the genetic algorithms. We will be seeing how they work one by one. We first have an initialization phase. Okay, that's basically creating a random population. That's the initialization. And then we need to have a fitness assignment, or we need to have a fitness function. In the previous example, what we said, we would like to have a better country, for example. That's a goal. That's a fitness function. Okay, you measure the goodness of people, and that's our fitness function. Because we would like just the fit, just the good people to survive. Okay, and we need to have a selection criteria. We somehow need to have some selection from our population. And then in order to create next generations, we have two operators. The first one is crossover, and the second one is mutation. Okay? And then once we fulfill these four operators, we check whether we reach to our stopping criteria. If not, we create another population by using the previous population, and then we repeat this process over and over. And then we basically repeat that process a lot of times, and we create crowded populations so that even one doesn't survive from the population, another one should survive. Okay, that's basically the idea behind genetic algorithms. Now let's see some applications of genetic algorithms. Let's say we would like to create a car. Okay, and the idea is the car needs to survive from these bumps. Okay, this is because the goal, that's a fitness function. However you create the car, it needs to survive from this bump. And then initial population is a random initialization of our car. We put just two wheels, and then we try this fitness function. If the car passes this bump, then this population is fit. Then we can basically try our car with another bump. But if our initial population cannot even get from this bump, that means our initial population is not fit enough, then we change the population. Okay. For example, this is another population. Because this one couldn't survive from a bump, we try with another population. The next population is not created totally randomly. The first population is always created randomly. The other populations are created from the fittest survivals of previous generations plus their mutations and crossovers. Okay. We don't just try randomly, as in Ransack. For example, if you remember Ransack algorithm, we basically try randomly, and out of this random trials, we come up with a good fit. It's not the same in genetic algorithms. We choose the fittest trials. For example, this is another population for this problem. As you see, we basically could get rid of some of the bumps, and the car is going in the right direction. And by changing the shape of the car, which is basically the population in our genetic algorithms case, we can come up with the best car that can get rid of all the bumps. So that's another application. That's basically a game where the ball needs to jump over this brick, right? And depending on from which location you start jumping and with which velocity on X and Y, you can either jump over this brick or you can crash the brick. Okay. And in order to solve this problem, we need to find the best velocity on X direction, best velocity on Y direction, and when an individual or when a boat needs to jump over that brick. Okay. And the idea is you create a lot of boats, thousands or millions of boats. Okay, you start with, and then with different velocities on X and Y direction, they try to jump over this brick. And the ones that can jump over this brick are the survivals of this generation. Yeah, and the next generation, you select from the survivals, you basically apply some mutation and crossover, and then you try this other generation. So you see, we have quite a few bots on each generation. All of them are trying to jump over the brick. As you see, they have different velocity on X and Y direction. Some of them even started jumping from here. For example, this guy started jumping from here. That's gonna most probably crash to here. But this one has a higher chance to jump over that brick. So that's how genetic algorithms work. Basically, you create a generation. Each generation tries to make better than the previous generation. And the final generation is the survival. And that's the generation that solves your optimization problem. So that's another example that's quite similar to the jumping over the brick problem. So we have a car, and we need to somehow drive that car in a way that it can basically drive on top of that hills. We start with an initial population. All individuals in the population drive differently, and as you see, some of them crashes at the beginning, some of them crashes at the middle, but those who can basically survive from the first bump, they are transferred into the second generation. Okay. That's another good example for genetics algorithms. So we are trying to create bots that can drive. Okay, you see, this is the initial population. Most of them crashed. These are the survivals. As the generation passes, that's the sixth generation, for example, most of the bots can complete the track as the generation passes. So initial random generation, the survivals, the fittest survive, they are transferred to the next generation, and they can complete the task. Okay, so let's work on some terminology. So we have the DNA. That's the sequence that defines how a bot behaves or looks. Now let's work on an example where we would like to have a bot and we would like our bot to go from here to here. Okay, and a bot can move either to left, right, down, or up. Okay, so in this case, our DNA will carry information about the moves. Okay, it's gonna be a sequence of moves, or it's gonna be a sequence of behaviors. So let's say our bot moved here in this direction and then it went down to right, down, down, and it started. It completed the path. Or it started here, it moved to right, 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 and down, down, down. Okay, these are basically two different DNAs for this bot. So the first DNA is right, right, down, right, down, down. Okay, the second DNA is right, 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 down, down, down. So it's this one. So basically these are two DNAs for our bot that could be able to complete this track. And there is a concept called DNA length. So you see, we have 6 moves here, we have 6 moves here as well. But the bot could go right, 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 down, left, right, down, down. Okay, in this case, the DNA length could be different. So there is this concept called DNA length as well. And now we have the fitness function. So it's a measure to find how good our bot is doing actually, or how good our bot did. And assume our bot landed on the yellow tile after performing all moves in its DNA. So the DNA is something predefined, such as our DNAs. For example, when you are born with your DNA. You cannot change your DNA. Okay? If you are gonna be black hair, then you will be black hair. It's not possible after your birth that you can change your DNA. It's similar with our bots. If a bot will start from here, and if its DNA is coded in a way that its move will be, for example, right, 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 down, left, then it's gonna land here. There is no other option. Okay. And our fitness function evaluates how good that bot did actually. So the aim was to start from here and go here. If you landed here, that means you are kind of far from our target point, which is this one. Therefore, our fitness function basically measures the distance between this point and this point in this case. And we would like to lower the fitness. We would like to lower the fitness function. Because if it produces a big number, that means you are far away from your target or from your goal. Okay. Okay, so another terminology. the population. So we have seen DNA, we have seen DNA length, we have seen the fitness function. Now we will be seeing the population. So genetic algorithms use not only one bot, but an entire population of them. Okay. So we will have a lot of iterations with the genetic algorithms, but in each iteration, you don't use just single bot. You use a lot of bots, and these bots, the combination of these bots, are called the population. Okay. In this case, for example, we have bot one, bot n, bot two, bot n, and if you look at their DNAs, they have different moves. They could have same moves as well. Okay, guys, this is important. They can have the same DNA as well. But the important thing is you are supposed to have a lot of bots in each population. And in each iteration, you will evaluate this population. You will never ever evaluate single bots. A single bot is not enough. You need to have a population to solve an optimization problem with genetic algorithms. Okay. And the algorithm always starts with an initial population that has completely random DNA. That's important as well. You don't need to choose something for your initialization problem. You start with a random DNA, and then you will be selecting the fittest over that population. By selecting the fittest from the population, you will come up with a solution with our genetic algorithms. Okay, now we have a population. We need a selection mechanism to create the next population, because we will have iterations on this population, so we need to have a mechanism for selection. The idea behind selection is we first find the fitnesses of our bots, and then we sort them with respect to their fitnesses. Okay, and we take the bots that perform best to the next generation. That's the selection. Okay, that's what the evolution says as the natural selection. We are transferring the best performing individuals, or we are transferring the best performing population parts to the next generation. Okay, that's the natural selection part. And there is actually no concrete rule for selecting the best out of your current population. Usually we use half of the population, half of the best performing bots of the current population, and we transfer the half to the next generation. But the thing is, there is no such a rule. You can just transfer, for example, 1/3 of this generation to the other generation as well. That's basically totally up to you. But the thing is, from your current population, you need to select some of the bots, and then you need to select these best performing bots and transfer them to the next generation. Okay, now comes the crossover. Out of these transferred or selected bots, we will create new bots by mixing their DNAs, because we know that they performed good. Okay, they were the fittest of their population. So if we basically cross over or mix them together, it's highly likely that we can come up with better offsprings. Okay, there are two terminologies here: crossover and offspring. Offspring is basically the child of these parents. So these guys are called parents, and this is the parent's child or offspring. And the crossover is basically creating another bot by combining the DNA, somehow combining the DNA of these two bots. We will be seeing how crossover works, basically, how we can combine these DNAs. But for now, as the terminology, just know that it's just a matter of combining these two bots together, their DNAs together. And they are not just random bots, they are two bots selected from the previous generation. Okay, they are the best performing bots, or they are out of the best performing bots. And we basically create a series of springs, and then we add these offsprings to the next population. And there is the concept of mutation. Okay, we have different types of mutations, but for any type of mutation, just remember one thing: mutations are just random. Okay, they are not done on purpose, they're not done to create something stronger. Sometimes you come up with something stronger, sometimes you come up with something less strong, but you need mutations so that you can basically create better offsprings. And then we have the concept of complete mutation or partial mutations. We will be seeing them in examples. And then we add these mutated bots to our population. So we apply crossover, we create a population, and for this newly created population, we apply mutation to come up with a stronger population. So this was basically the terminology for genetic algorithms. We have seen the concept of DNA, we have seen the concept of DNA length, we have seen the concept of fitness function, population, selection, crossover, and mutation. Now we will be working on knapsack problem. And for the knapsack problem, we will make the definition. We have seen the definition in the previous lecture basically, but I will go through that. I will go through the idea, and then we will try to solve the knapsack problem brute forcefully. And we will see it's basically not possible if you have too many items in your bag. And then we will see how we can solve the knapsack problem by using genetic algorithms. Then we will be working on the traveling salesman problem. So coming back to the knapsack problem, let's remember it. We said we have a bag, we will go into the wilderness, and our bag can carry just 30 kilograms. And there are items with their weights and with survival points. And we need to select some of that items that doesn't in total exceed 30 kilograms. So if you select, for example, glucose plus sleeping bag that weighs 35 kilograms. So these two items can never ever be taken together with our bag, okay? And the knapsack problem is trying to optimize our bag in a way that we carry 30 kilograms, but we carry items with best survival points. Okay. For example, if you take rope and pocket knife, you have 5 kilograms of weight and 17 points of survival point. Okay. If you, for example, add a torch to that, you will have additional survival point of 5, but you will have a weight of 5 kilograms. But if you add a bottle, it's gonna be additional 9 kilograms with 8 survival points. So it's not just easy to select any of these items, okay, because you have limitations. You are trying to maximize your survival points. That's why it's an optimization problem. But you have a constraint on weight, okay? So this is our constraint, and this is what we would like to maximize. So we would like to have maximum survival points where we cannot carry more than 30 kilograms. That's basically what knapsack problem tries to solve. And the thing You're not gonna believe it, but with the number of items, and as the number of items increase, the time required increases exponentially. For example, if you have more than 29 items, that really goes beyond the power of your computer. So that becomes a very difficult problem to solve. So let's see how we can basically solve knapsack problem brute forcefully, and then we will see how we can basically solve it with genetic algorithms. So I provided you a function called the brute force solving of the knapsack problem. It's taking the weights. Basically, it's taking the values, these are the survival points, and it's taking the capacity of your bag. Okay, we cannot exceed this capacity. And what we will be working on is these examples. Here we have basically 3 items. Here we have 3 items as well. Here we have 2 items. Here we have 5 items. Here we have, I think, 11 items or something like that. Okay. And these are basically the total survival points we expect. And these are survival points. Okay. These are weights of our items. And this is the capacity of our bag. For example, this first bag can carry 6 kilograms. We have 3 items. The first one weighs 1, the second one weighs 2, the third one weighs 3. Okay, so this is not an interesting example, this one, because we have a capacity of 6 kilograms, and in total we have 6 kilograms, which means basically we can carry all the 3 items. So this is not an optimization problem. It's pretty straightforward. But here we have 3 items as well, with different survival points, but their total weight exceeds the bag capacity, which is 50. Okay, so if you just take these 2 items, then you cannot carry this item. And if you take this item and this item, that makes 30 kilograms. That's below 50. But if you add this, that's exceeding the capacity. So you can either take these 2 items, or you can either take these 2 items, or you can take this item and this item. So the knapsack problem is trying to find the best possible combination that's maximizing our survival points. Okay, now let's see how we can deal with that. So the brute force solving of the problem, it's taking the weights, it's basically taking the survival points or the values, and it's basically taking the capacity of our bag. So we have n elements that could have been length values as well. That's giving it the length of either this or this one. Okay, and here we are creating all combinations in range n. So that's basically creating us our DNAs, and in that DNAs it says, for example, for 3 items 0 0 0, which means we are not carrying anything. Okay, 1 0 1, that means we are carrying first one, we are not carrying the second one, we are carrying the third one. Okay, let me create something here. So in these all combinations variable, we will have for 3 items, for example, something like this: 1 1 1. That means we are carrying all 3 items. If we have, for example, 1 0 0, we can carry first item, we are not gonna carry second item, we are not gonna carry third item. If we have, for example, 1 0 1, we will be carrying first and the third item. Okay, so let me delete this cell. And now this is the brute force part of our algorithm. For every combination, we take our DNA, which is C, okay, and we make an initialization for the survival points and the weights, and for every gene in our DNA. So let me recreate this. For example, let's say our DNA was 101. Okay, these guys are genes in our DNA, and for every gene in that DNA, if the total weight up until now is higher than the capacity, then we don't need to go any further. Okay, let's say we did this. We had a gene like 111, and if we carry first two items, and if we exceed basically the capacity, then we don't need to go any further. Okay, that's why we have a break here. If we can go any further, then if the gene is a 1, that's why we multiply it with CI. CI is the gene. We multiply the survival point with the gene and add it to the total survival points, and we multiply the weight of that item and add it to the total weight. Okay, and after going through all the genes, we basically check whether the total weight is below the capacity or not. And if it is below the capacity and the survival point is higher than the maximum value, then our new maximum value is this total survival points for the DNA, and the best survival value is that C. Okay, now let's press Shift Enter so that we can use this brute force function. Let's press Shift Enter here as well so that we have our examples in hand. Now this is just going through all the examples and then measuring the time required to execute our brute force function for that individual example. Okay, and then we will be printing the result that's coming from our brute force algorithm, and then we will be printing basically the expected results. Now let's try to evaluate that. Okay, now some observations. So that's basically what returned as a survival point from our algorithm. That was the basically expected value. And if you take a look at the first example, as we discussed further, if we take all the three items, and this is basically the DNA that says that you take the first item, you take the second item, and you take the third item as well, then you will end up with a survival point of 65. That's basically the sum of all these three numbers, and our function was able to find that. And the total time that was required for executing our brute force function for these three items was basically 0. That's negligible. Okay, that was too short, so that we didn't even print that. For the second example, now we have a gene something like this, which says don't take the first item, take the second item and the third item. Now if you take a look, the weight of the second and third item is 50. So that's basically the capacity of our bag. And the total survival point is 220. And that's what our algorithm found. And that was basically the expected ground truth. And again, we had three items. The time required to execute the brute force algorithm was negligible. Okay. In the third example, we basically have two items. Again, their weight is way behind the total capacity of our bag, so we can just carry all these two items. and our DNA says you can just carry all items. And since it has 2 items, the required time is negligible as well. Okay, now things are getting fishy. Now we have 5 items. Okay, and the DNA says you can just carry, or you should carry, the first item and the last item. Now let's take a look at the example. We have a capacity of 6. Okay, 6 kilograms. And these are the weights of our items. As you see, the last item is 5 kilograms. The first item is 1 kilograms. If you take these 2 items, you cannot carry anything anymore. And if you take a look at the survival points of taking the first one and the last one, that's basically 40. Now let's take a look whether we can do better than 40, whether that was the best solution or not. If we, for example, take the first 3 items, that in total makes 3 plus 2 plus 1, 6 kilograms as well. And the total survival points you can get out of this bag is 35, which is below 40. We found 40. Okay. Now we have 6 kilograms. I could carry this one and this one, which is basically 35 kilograms as well. You see? And that's basically more or less what we can carry with our bag. So the optimization that was done brute forcefully gave us this series, this DNA, which says just carry the first one and the last one, then your survival points will be maximized. And if you take a look, that's basically 0 as well. Now comes the last example where we have 11 items, and the brute force method says you should carry the first one, second one, fourth, fifth one, sixth one, and blah blah. I'm not gonna go through the example. As you should understand by now, the brute force algorithm is basically finding the best solution, but I would like to show you this. The thing is, it's way much more than having 5 items. So that's why we have this exponential growth here. That's why we have something like this. Okay. Which means basically you cannot solve this problem in a brute force manner if you have too many items. So now let's try to see what we can do for the knapsack problem if we want to use genetic algorithms. So if you remember from the previous lecture, the initial thing we need to do is initialization. Okay. We create an initial population and we initialize that. Okay. Now let's go through our terminology. This is the population. These 4 guys are our boats. This is the first boat, second boat, third boat, fourth boat. And this is, you can call this as a DNA or a chromosome, doesn't matter. And each item in this DNA or chromosome is called a gene. Okay. And in total, we call this 4 boats a population. And the initial population is created randomly. There is no rule to create an initial population. You just create them randomly. Okay. And the size of the population you should decide for yourself. But usually it's a good practice to start with a big population. Genetic algorithms require, or they like, population that are high. Okay. Then, if you remember from our terminology, we have the fitness function. Okay. We somehow need to evaluate each chromosome or each DNA or each member of our population, whether they could solve our problem or whether they're close to solving our problem or not. And this fitness function is basically summing up the survival points that this chromosome can carry. So what I mean with that, so remember we had 6 items that we can carry in our bag. Okay, and this chromosome says you can carry the first item, which is I think sleeping bag. You cannot carry the second and third item. You can carry the fourth, fifth items, and which is torch and bottle, and you cannot carry the last item. And their total weight is 29, which is below 30, and their total survival point is 28. So this is the fitness for A1 chromosome. This is a chromosome from our randomly initialized population. Okay. Let's say, for example, we have A2 chromosome, which is 001110. That means you can carry pocket knife, torch, and bottle, which in total weighs 16. Okay. And their total survival point is 23. Now, one thing I would like to show you is, you see, we can carry 30 kilograms, and this chromosome only weighs 16 kilograms. But we don't force any chromosome to carry something close to 30. Okay, because we initialize all the chromosomes or all the members or all the DNAs randomly. This could have been 0000 as well, or 6 zeros. That means we don't carry anything. Okay, so remember, do not force anything for the initial population. Do not force anything for any chromosome in the population. Okay, so we have our first population, or we have a population. We somehow calculated their fitnesses by using our fitness function. Now we need to select the best survivals from that generation so that we can transfer them to the next generation. So we can select the fit chromosomes and allow them to produce offsprings, but that would lead to chromosomes that are more close to one another in a few next generations and therefore less diversity. Therefore, we generally use roulette wheel selection methods. I will show you what that means. So the thing is, you don't just select the best survivals. You select the best survivals and then you mix them, and you don't know whether that mix is performing better or not from that survivals, but you just mix them. Okay, and in order to select from our population, we can use either fixed point strategy, one fixed point strategy, or we can use two fixed point strategies. You create a wheel, and the percentage of that wheel basically depends on the survival point of that chromosome. So in our case, we had 4 chromosomes in our population, remember. And we calculated their survival points. That was 28, 23, 12, and 34, which means they will have a percentage with respect to their survival points. And as you see, the 4th chromosome basically have the biggest tile, then comes the 2nd chromosome, the 1st chromosome, the 2nd chromosome, and the 3rd chromosome have the least survival points, which means actually it has the smallest tile. Now for the fixed point strategy, that's like a roulette wheel. You basically roll that wheel, and whatever chromosome comes here is gonna be selected. Okay. If you have a 2-point selection method, if you have a 2 fixed point selection methods, in this case you select one chromosome, or you select one both from your population. Here you select both parents. Okay, you select both the father and the mother. If you use one fixed point, you need to select the father first and then you select the mother. Okay, so you select two chromosomes that you will be combining. If you basically use two fixed points, then you basically both select the father and mother. And if that percentage is big enough, the father and mother may be the same. Okay. Now we have selected our parents. We somehow need to make a crossover. So there are multiple strategies for crossing over. If we have one point crossover strategy, then we select, for example, first half from the first parent and the second half from the second parent. Okay, so 101 is coming from the first parent. So these are the parents, this is the offspring or the child. And the second half, which is 110, is coming from this parent. Okay, this is one point crossover strategy. Okay, there will be a question in the quiz about this. So either from this side of the parent or this side of the parent. So this is coming from this side of the parent. This is coming from this part of the parent. That could be reverse as well. So this could have been here as well. So this is a potential offspring as well. As you see, this 110 is coming from this parent, and 011 is this part is coming from this parent. This is one point crossover strategy. If you have multi-point crossover strategy, and for example, this part of the offspring is coming from this parent, the middle part of the offspring is coming from this parent, and this last part, these last two genes are coming from this parent. Similarly, these two genes are coming from this parent, these two genes are coming from this parent, and these two genes are coming from this parent. Okay, so this is multi-point strategy. And then we have mutations. Now, why do we have mutations? We want change in the population. And as we said, mutations are just random. And what you do with the mutation is you basically randomly select one gene and then you change it. Okay, and it doesn't have any logic, it doesn't have any strategy, it's just random. You just select any gene that could have been the strongest gene of that chromosome, basically doesn't matter. You select one gene, you change it. Okay, that's the basic idea behind mutation. And summing up the entire process, we basically create a population and then we make an evaluation with our fitness function. We select the fittest guys and then we basically create crossovers, offsprings from crossovers, and then for that offsprings we apply mutations so that our next generation becomes stronger or they become more different from the previous generation. So there are different termination conditions for genetic algorithms. There is no improvement in the population for over X iterations, for example. Then you can basically terminate, or we have already predefined an absolute number of generations for our algorithm. Let's say we will have 100 generations and then we just terminate. We can either reach to the maxima or we may not reach to the maxima, but we terminate after 100 iterations, for example. Or when our fitness function has reached a predefined value, that's a stopping condition as well. So we can have three different termination strategies. Because remember, this is an iterative process. We need to somehow have a stopping criteria or a termination condition. Now let's go back to the Jupyter notebook and try to solve the knapsack problem with genetic algorithms. So this is gonna be randomly initializing items. We will have 11 items. So you see, we have the first item. We initialize our weights and survival points. Here, weights are randomly initialized between 1 and 15, and the survival points are initialized between 10 and 750. We have a knapsack threshold, which is basically what we can carry with our bag. And this is basically the list of our 10 items with their weights and their survival points. Okay, so this part is just the definition of the problem. Create 11 items, assign random weights and random survival points. Now we will try to solve our problem so that we will be carrying 35 kilograms, and then we will try to maximize our survival points. So we are going to have 8 chromosomes for every population, and we will be initializing our population randomly. Okay, this is just the initial population creation phase. So this is our initial population, totally random. So we have 10 items, which means we are supposed to have 4, 5, 8, 10 genes for every chromosome. Okay, and we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 8 chromosome in each population. That's what we defined here. Okay. When you're working alone, you can just increase or decrease this number. So this is basically defining how crowded our populations supposed to be. You can change this. You cannot change the number of genes in each chromosome because we are trying to solve a problem with 10 items. Okay. And here we limit our number of generations. So we will have at most 50 iterations. That's what we define here as well. Okay. Now that we have our initial population, remember from our terminology, we need to have a fitness function. Okay. So this fitness function will be evaluating the weight and the survival point. It's gonna have the population as the input, and this threshold is basically how much your bag can carry, and then it's creating a fitness for that population. It's basically assigning a fitness value for every chromosome in the population. Okay, so let's press Shift Enter so that we can use that fitness function. And we need to define a selection strategy. That's basically we will be using half of the population in our selection method. And then we have our crossover. Okay. In next example, we will have a more detailed understanding of the crossover. For now, just remember we will be selecting 2 parents randomly, and then from these 2 parents we will basically create an offspring, and we will take half of the genes from the first parent. So we have something called a crossover rate. Okay, that means we're not gonna cross over all the potential parents. We will just make the crossover on some of the parents. And out of that parents, for the offspring's genes, we will take For example, the first half from the first parent and the second half from the second parent. So that's what our crossover is doing. And we have the mutation. Here we have a mutation rate. So we cannot apply mutation to all the genes. Okay, some stuff needs to remain same. So mutations are supposed to be random, and mutations are supposed to be rare. You see, that's quite similar with the nature. You don't have mutations everywhere. You have very small mutations. Some mutations create cancer, for example. They're not good, but some mutations create extra strong creatures. But they need to be rare. So the mutation rate basically is there to make the mutations rare. And you basically have a random gene, and then you just change this gene from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 0. Okay, that's what the mutation is doing. And the optimized procedure is basically what's performing the whole evaluation process. Okay, it's basically taking the weights, taking the population, and then it's for every population, it's creating the fitness functions, and then it's applying a selection criteria and creating the parents for the next generation. It's using these parents for crossover. The crossover is creating offsprings. We apply mutation to these offsprings, and then we complete our next population, the first half with the parents that are performing the best in this iteration, and the other half from the mutants. Okay, let me repeat this iteration. So this is the iteration. We will repeat this 50 times, and in each iteration for the current population we will calculate the fitnesses. Okay, remember we had 8 chromosomes in every population, so we will have 8 fitnesses, and then from these 8 chromosomes inside the current population we will take the best 4 into the parents. Okay, we are gonna toss the rest. We will just use 4 of the best performing parents, and now from this best performing 4 parents we will apply crossover and create 4 more offsprings. Okay, and then we will apply mutation to these offsprings so that we will have 4 mutants. And for the next generation we will use these 4 best performing parents for the current iteration, and we will use the mutants, the 4 mutants for the rest of the population. Okay, and we will apply this 50 times. And let's see what will happen when we do this. So that's gonna be the last generation. That's showing basically the fitnesses of the last generation, and that's basically the gene that made it best. And it says the selected items are 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10. That's highly likely that it's gonna be a good solution. I'm not saying that's gonna be the best solution, because we limited basically the number of iterations to 50. Okay, and we are initializing our genetic algorithms with random genes. So what I was saying is genetic algorithms do not find always the best solution. They find you a solution that's good enough. Okay, so that's one thing you should remember about the genetic algorithms. They do not find the best solution. They do not always find the best solution. They find you a good solution that should do your job. Okay, that's one thing you should definitely remember about genetic algorithms. They have a tendency to stuck at local maximas, but they solve problems that are not possible to solve in any other way. Okay, so that's something you should remember about genetic algorithms. All right. Now we will be working on traveling salesman problem. Let's make a demonstration about what that problem is, and in the next lecture we will be seeing how we can solve the traveling salesman problem. So let me run the script. We will be using PyCharm because we will be debugging basically the code in order to understand what the code is doing. So we have a universe and we will basically travel in that universe. So we have planets, okay, plenty of planets. And the traveling salesman problems is trying to solve or trying to find the best routes which is passing through all of these planets and it's the shortest way. Okay, we will try to solve that problem. That's that more point. The more points you have, it's more difficult to solve this problem. So we defined basically our problem. And here is how the genetic algorithms work. It created an initial population. It then used that population, and this is basically a solution that solved the problem. Okay, I'm not saying that's the best solution. Most probably it is the best solution because we don't have too many planets. But that really solved this problem in a good way. Let's try another example. Let's make it more complicated. So the more points you add, it becomes more and more difficult for a brute force algorithm to solve this. Okay, we have a lot of points now. Now that's gonna take some time. See, it's trying to optimize and that's what it could do best for this problem. Okay, I think you understand the basic definition of the traveling salesman problem. In the next lecture, we will see how we can solve this problem by using genetic algorithms. We made a demonstration about how it works. Now we will be debugging the code so that we can understand what's going on. So in order to use PyCharm, that's something I already showed you with your Anaconda navigator. You can just press launch and then you will be using PyCharm Community Edition. The good thing about PyCharm is you can basically see step by step what's going on with the codes. I provided the codes. You will be finding it in the link. You can basically debug it yourself and then you can better understand what's going on, how we create the population, how mutation works, how crossover works. So that's a better way to understand what's going on. So let me make a brief introduction for the codes. We will be importing something from environment. Okay, you don't need to know the details of that. The basic class we will be using is the routes because we are trying to solve basically the traveling salesman problem. And our DNA will be choosing or will consist of the numbers that represent the nodes. So what do we mean by the node? Let me show it again. So these are our nodes, okay? And each DNA tries to solve the problem. If it says, for example, 1, 2, 3, that's basically this road, 1, 2, 3. Let's add a couple of more nodes. If it says, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's one DNA, okay? 1, 4, 5, 3, 2, that's another DNA as well. So our DNAs will be consisting of these numbers. Okay. So this part is basically the fundamental class that we will be using. It's called the routes. And it will be responsible from creating DNAs and mixing them together. So it's gonna be in this mix function we will have both crossover as well as the mutation, and we will be seeing two types of mutation, one partial mutation type and another partial mutation type. We will go through that code and we will see in detail what they will be doing. Okay. Now let's try to debug the code. So this is where the code starts. Okay. If you press this debug button, we start debugging. So this is our population size. In each population we will have 50 potential routes. Okay. And by pressing F8 you can go to the next line. We will be defining a mutation rates, and then we will be defining a selection criteria. Normally we select basically the half of the population, but in this problem we will be selecting the first 5 best elements from the population. This definition is where we basically have this thing. Okay, when you execute that command you will have this, and in order to keep going with the debugging you need to define your nodes. Okay, in order for the simplicity, let's define something easy. We will have 5 nodes. Okay, and just press enter to keep going. Okay, once you define your nodes, just press enter. Oops. Now the planets or nodes we will be using as nodes. Okay, and the DNA length is the number of planets or number of dots we defined. And remember, we defined 5 planets, and this is our initial population, which is empty. Okay, and in here we will be creating our first population, initial population. And remember, the population size is 50 for every item in the population or every chromosome in the population. This route is basically giving us a potential route, which is the DNA. Okay, and then we will append each potential route to our population. And if you press F9, you can skip this because this is an iteration that's gonna evaluate for 50 times. Just press F9. Now we have our initial population created. Now let's see what we have inside our initial population. For that, you can just say evaluate expression, and when you say evaluate, you see we have 50 elements, which means we have 50 chromosomes in our initial population. Now let's see what we have inside these chromosomes. So this is the distance. This will be used as fitness. For now it's all 0 because we didn't evaluate anything about the fitness. Okay. We have DNA length, which is supposed to be 5 because we have 5 planets there. And this is the DNA. That's basically start from the 3rd planet, go to 4, go to the 2nd planet, go to 1st planet, and go to the 0th planet. That's what it says. Okay, this is one chromosome, and in this population we have 50 chromosomes. Let's take a look at this one as well. See, these are different. They could be same. They could have been same. Here we start from the 2nd planet, we go to 1st, 4th, 3rd, and the 0th. Okay, that's a different route. We don't know its fitness yet, but we would like to make this minimum. So the smaller this distance, the better that route is. Okay. And this is go to the first planet, go to fourth, third, second, and the zeroth. That goes on like this. So one thing you should remember, this is our initial population that's created totally randomly. Okay. And since our population count is 50, population size is 50, we have 50 chromosomes in our population. Okay. So we will be trying to find the best distance. That's gonna be our final goal. And this is basically the main loop. Okay. We're on the generation 0. As the generations passes, we will increase this number. Okay. And now we have our initial population. This population will always change. But what we will be doing with the population will not change. Okay. So this environment reset is basically resetting what was drawn as the lines. Don't worry about that. That's not doing anything. Okay. I will be skipping the code up to here. So we will be basically evaluating the fitnesses for the population. Now let's try to evaluate the population again. Evaluate expression. We press evaluate. Now remember from the previous evaluation, we had 3, 4, 2, 1, 0. We had 0 as the distance. Okay. Here we calculated the fitnesses, which means if you start from the third planet, go to fourth, second, first, and zeroth, you will have in total this number of distance. Okay. And if you follow this route, you will have this number of distance. This is basically the fitness of this chromosome. This is the fitness of this zeroth chromosome. And for every chromosome in our population, as you see, now we have this distance. All of them were 0 beforehand. Okay. Now we calculated the fitness for our population. Doesn't matter whether that's the initial population or that's the 5th generation, the 6th generation. We need to calculate basically the fitnesses. And here we sort our population with respect to their fitnesses. Now let's try to evaluate this as well. You see, we have a quite small number here as the distance. So this route is quite fit. And apparently this route is fit as well. This is slightly higher than this one, but it's still a good distance. And here we basically have the same chromosome. Okay, these genes are same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. That's not a big deal. Okay, that's not a problem, because we will be creating crossovers from these guys. Okay, that means even if these two chromosomes are same, maybe this is same as well. You see, this third chromosome is same as well. This one, and this one is same. That doesn't change anything in genetic algorithms, because we will be using these guys and we will apply crossover to these chromosomes, and then we will be applying mutation, which means we will basically come up with something totally different than these chromosomes. Okay. Now we will clear the population so that we can make the population ready for the next generation. Okay, so we have 5 as unselected. Now we will select the first 5 best chromosomes and we will append them to our population. Okay, that's gonna take 5 times. Now our population is not empty anymore. Let's try to evaluate it. You see we have 5 elements. That's why we just selected 5 first best routes from the previous population. We could, for example, use half of the first population. We could have used 10. There is no best way to choose that. Okay, there is no best strategy for selecting the fittest from the previous generation. In this example, we selected just first 5. We could have selected first 10. We could have selected half of the population. That's totally up to you and totally up to the problem. Okay. Okay, the population size is 50. Now we have 5 people in our population. We need to somehow fill this 45 guys. Okay. Now we need to somehow randomly fill these guys. Okay. So we had a mutation rate. And that was a small number. That was something like 0.1. And if our randomly generated number is bigger than this mutation rate, we will basically use our fittest previous generation to create one new offspring. If this is smaller than the mutation rate, we will create a totally random chromosome and then we will append it. Okay, that's one way of mutation as well. We will be adding totally random chromosomes to our population, but we are doing this like for 10% of the data. We are not doing it for everything. In this example, since our randomly generated number is bigger than mutation rate, now we will be using 2 chromosomes from selected parents, and then we actually want 2 different chromosomes. We don't want the same indexes. So this while is just responsible from selecting 2 different indexes. So 3, the second index is 0 is the first index. Now we will be taking these 2 chromosomes or 2 DNAs from our sorted population. You see, we have these 2 chromosomes or 2 DNAs. And now with our mix routine or mix function, we will be mixing these 2 DNAs to come up with a totally different DNA or chromosome. Okay, and now we will append this to our population. Now this part is important. Let's see what we will be doing with this mix operation. So we have DNA 1, we have DNA 2. As you see, the content of DNA 1 is 43210. The content of DNA 2 is 12340. They are different. They are defining 2 different possible routes. And our mix function will be combining DNA 1 and DNA 2 to come up with a different DNA. By just pressing F7, we go inside the mix function. Now let's try to debug this. So let's try to modify DNA 1. In order to modify that, we will copy this DNA 1 into a variable called DNA. Okay. And you see the DNA length was 5 because we had 5 planets. First, we will be selecting some of the genes. So DNA I is a gene, for example. And then we will be taking some genes from DNA 2. That's what we are trying to do here. Let me go back to the slides in order to show this on an example. So in this for loop, that's the for loop we are debugging right now. What we are trying to do is we are trying to mix two DNAs. Okay. For example, this is DNA1, this is DNA2. We will be taking some of the DNAs from the first DNA, some of the genes from first DNA, and some of the genes from the second DNA. And that's how we do it basically. You first store the gene from the first DNA, and then for that same index, let's say we will be basically changing the third gene. Okay, you find the index of the gene that's represented in the third index, which is 3, and you find where basically this gene is in the second DNA. Okay, once you find that index, you go to that index of the first DNA and you assign the previously stored value to that index. Okay, and for ith index you assign the gene from DNA2. So that's the mixing operation. That's the crossover. Okay, that could have been different. We could have applied a different strategy. We have seen 1-point strategy, multiple point strategies. This is a multiple point strategy as well. This is basically taking any random index and then replacing that gene at that index with the gene from the second DNA. Okay, this part is the crossover part. And then there's gonna be another part with the mutation. We will be having random partial mutation 1 and random partial mutation 2. That's gonna be basically, again, we will store the first, we will store the gene at index I, and then we will have a random number, for example, random index. That index is gonna be, for example, this sixth index. Okay, and then we will find the gene in that index, and to that index we will be assigning the previously stored value. Okay, that basically means we will assign this guy to here, and then we will assign this guy to here. We just replace these guys. Okay, this is a partial mutation. We again have the same planets, because you need to have all these 6 numbers here. You need to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this example, we have 6 planets, for example. So in the first partial mutation, the idea is you basically replace this gene with an index that was selected randomly. Okay, you just replace these 2 genes and you come up with something like this. So 3, 1, 2, that's the same part. It's same here and here. You replace this one and this one. Therefore, you have a 5 here, you have 0, and you have 4 here. Okay, that's the first partial mutation. And in the second partial mutation, that's a little bit harder to understand, so please listen carefully. You insert something. Okay, let's say we are working on the ith gene. Okay, we select a gene randomly. In this case, that's 4. And then we insert this 4 right before this index. Okay, that's why we have here 3, 1, 2. Once we insert this 4 here, we have 3, 1, 4, 2, 4, that's going like this. Okay. But now we have, instead of 6 genes, we have 7 genes, right? But that's not okay. We need to have 6 genes. Now that we inserted this gene here, we just remove this gene from here. Okay. So in the end, we just drop this gene and we end up with 3, 1, 4, 2. This is dropped, 0 and 5. So this part of the code is doing that. Okay. And once you do this, you will end up with a mixed DNA. Okay. Let's try to do it. So now we are making a crossover because our randomly generated number is smaller than 0.5. So this is basically making sure statistically 50% of the first DNA is replaced by the genes of second DNA. Okay. So the crossover is over right now. So this was DNA 1. 43210. Okay, you can see it here as well. Now let's check DNA, which used to be a copy of DNA 1. You see, it was 43210. Now it is 12340. Okay, with the crossovers. Now it's not done yet because this mix function is not just doing the crossover, but it's performing the mutations as well. So for every gene in our DNA or in our chromosome, we will check whether we would like to have a partial mutation or not. So this is some sort of a mutation rate. So for 10% of the genes, we will apply this basic mutation method, and for the rest, again with a 10% statistics, we will try to apply this more complicated insertion mutation. Okay, let's see. So our randomly generated number was not smaller than 0.1. We just skipped this. We skipped this as well. No mutation for the first gene. So for the second gene, now we will have this mutation, this kind of mutation. Let me show you. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. Now we will have a mutation. Let's see. It's 21340 now because of the mutation. Okay. So for the third gene, we have no mutation. That's totally random, totally randomly mutating the genes. So for the fourth gene, no mutation as well. Since we had 5 genes basically, our mix routine created this new route, which is basically, let's evaluate what it says. So distance is 0. We didn't calculate any fitness for this yet. And the final DNA is 21340. Okay, this is the result of crossover and mutation. And the crossover was from these 2 genes. You see, it's totally different from its parents. This is the mother, this is the father, and this is the child. And as you see, the genome is totally different from these 2 because of the crossover plus the mutation. So that's the power of the genetic algorithms. These 2 DNAs performed well. They were the fittest in the first generation, and by combining these 2 genes, we obtained something that could have been stronger or weaker than these 2 DNAs. We don't know it yet, But in the end, this is different than its mother and father. Okay, that's the power of genetic algorithms. So things to remember about genetic algorithms: we start with a initial population that's created totally randomly, and then we evaluate their fitnesses. We select somehow with a strategy the best performing individuals or best performing chromosomes. And then from these best performing chromosomes, we create new offsprings by using crossover and mutation. And then we repeat this process until we find a good solution, or until the number of iterations we predefined is over. Okay. And another thing you need to remember about genetic algorithms is sometimes you find the best solution, sometimes you find a solution. That doesn't mean to be the best solution, it's gonna be just a solution. Genetic algorithms have the tendency to stuck at local maximas, therefore it's not guaranteed to have the best solution, but you will always come up with a fine solution. Okay, these are the things you should remember about genetic algorithms. You can keep going on debugging this, but the most important part was the first generation, creation of the first generation, and the first iteration where we selected the best 5 DNAs from the initial population, and then these mutation parts and these mixing parts. These are the most important things about this code. Okay, you can just go through the code yourself. As I said, don't worry about this environment stuff. That's just for visualization. Just try to understand what this part of the code is doing. And the important function is this mix function. Okay, try to understand how it is doing, how this is performing here the crossover, and here the mutation, partial mutation with replacement, and here partial mutation with insertion. Okay. Now let's try to wrap up. What we have seen this week. So we have seen the terminology about genetic algorithms. We have seen the steps of the genetic algorithms. We said we make an initialization, we create a first generation, and then we define a fitness function. Then we create a selection criteria, how many of that generation will be transferred to the next generation. Then we apply crossover and mutation operators to the parents from that generation in order to create the next generation. And we have seen 2 applications. One is the Knapsack problem, and the other one is the traveling salesman problem. And basically that's how we initialize. These are the genes, these are the chromosomes or the DNAs, that's the population. We have a fitness function, we have a selection criteria, we have crossover operation, and we have mutation operation. And what we discussed is genetic algorithms do not scale well with complexity. You should not use genetic algorithms for too complicated problems. The better solution is only in comparison to other solutions. It's not guaranteed to have the best solution with genetic algorithms. In many problems, genetic algorithms have a tendency to converge towards local optima. So be careful while you are using genetic algorithms. So that was it for this week's lecture. Next week we will be discussing neural networks.